Resource Center. Thank you, Jen. Let's talk about what's going on today. It's Coatesville. This is our second community roundtable discussion. This idea was created as part of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council Neighborhood Safety Solutions Initiative, where we welcome our panelists here, our visitors, and our staff. Again, my name is Trina Bass. I am a therapist with Child Guidance Resource Center, and I am a member of the Community Council. Just one more thing, just to give you a little bit of child guidance, that we have been helping children and families throughout the southeastern Pennsylvania, throughout southeastern PA, for over 65 years with mental health services. Our moderator today is Elgin from Friends Associates, and we will be joined by our Child Guidance Director of Marketing, Ms. Leah Richmond, who will be facilitating now.
Oh, you're not interested.
Thank you, Trina. All right, I'm gonna just do some muting. Perfect. Hi, everybody. Good morning. As Trina said, my name is Leah. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm really excited about the conversation, and we're just going to dive in. So with that said, I would love to welcome Elgin Bailey for agreeing to be today's monitor and let you take it from here. Logistic-wise, if you have questions or comments, please put them, you can contact me or Jen Toof in the chat, and we will say your questions or comments as we go along. But with that said, handing it over to Elgin.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this incredibly crucial and much needed discussion this morning. And welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules of doing great work in the community for people to join this particular conversation. Couple of things real quickly. I want to give a moment for all of you to briefly, hopefully, introduce yourselves. I know many of you have a long bio, but if we can keep it kind of brief because we want to dive into the meat of the discussion. So what I will do is I will kind of go around what I see on the screen to pick the first person to introduce themselves. And that would be Mr. Berry. Good morning, sir. Would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Good morning. I'm Jarvis Berry. I'm with an organization called the Coatesville Youth Initiative, and I'm also a resident of Coatesville.
Councilperson Graves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nydea Graves. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a Coatesville city councilor. I'm a housing service provider and at Friends Association and co-founder of Chester County Stands Up, a political organization who has been doing work here in Chester County and especially focused in Coatesville.
Thank you. Mr. Wilburn.
Hi, good morning. Keith Wilburn, founder and executive director of Coatesville Kids to College. And we have been providing academic, emotional, spiritual empowerment to children, youth in the city of Coatesville for 8 years now.
Outstanding. And last but not least, Pastor Kranz.
Morning, everyone. My name is Josh Kranz. I'm longtime Coatesville community resident, pastor of Providence Church, Coatesville. I'm also Coatesville School Board member. And my wife directs the Bridge Academy and Community Center here in Coatesville and work with kids after school programs and things like that.
Outstanding. And again, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and we're going to dive right in. The questions will be asked specifically to the panel at large, but initially I will direct a question according around the screen as we go. And again, not to belabor the point, but I want us to try to be able to allow everyone the opportunity to kind of chime in and offer their perspective on the questions, okay? So with that said, our roundtable will consist of questions and answers, all right? We're gonna dive right in, and I'm gonna go to Councilperson Graves first with the first question. What do you see as the main concern issue regarding diversity within the Coatesville community?
Thanks, Elgin. So the main concern For me, with diversity in the Coatesville community, is that the diversity that we strive to achieve in Coatesville, the goal diversity, is diverse only in looks, but not diverse in equity. And so what I mean by that is people will say, we need more women on the panel. We need ensure that diversity that looks diverse. However, diversity goes beyond just race and gender. There's all different levels of privilege and marginalization. And people need to recognize that if you are going to bring a person of color to the table, they're not going to show up the same way a white person would, because they're a person of different experience. So you don't want to just look like a white person or look like a person of color. You need to be a person who has different experience. And there's all ranges of marginalization or in diversity, like having neurodivergence, having people from different class and having people from all walks of life, but also to show up as themselves. A lot of time when we talk about diversity here, we want people of marginalization to strive to be people of privilege instead of just allowing people of marginalization to show up as themselves and to honor them and to honor their needs. One of the biggest examples is we know that our community is revitalizing and there's a big push towards home ownership, which is wonderful. However, it really erases the people who are unhoused, people who are systemically unhoused, people who are renters and systemically always going to be renters. Instead of creating a world or creating Coatesville which they can exist and have comfort, we are making them strive towards the privilege of being homeowners, which completely erases the diversity of this community. And that's just one example of a category, but there's ways in which we do this across the board of diversity in all the ways that people can be marginalized. So I think the biggest thing is our goal of diversity needs to strive more towards equity than towards just inclusion.
Good, good. Outstanding. Mr. Berry, I'm going to come to you next, sir. Same question. What do you see as the main concerns, issues regarding diversity within the Coatesville community?
Well, on the one hand, I agree with what Ms. Graves said, so I won't add that part to my comment. Excuse me. But taking it from a different side, I guess what I'll add is for me, what I see is, you know, you look at the school district and you look at our school system, and Coatesville actually has one of the most diverse school districts in Chester County. And of course, as Ms. Graves pointed out, I'm really talking more of what you see at this point. But Coatesville School District is one of the most diverse school districts in the community, in the county. But once the bell rings, diversity is watered down. It literally becomes segregated so that we're not all blended together at that point. You have the city of Coatesville, for example, which is more highly people of color. And even within that, we're segregated. From my vantage point, there's not enough interaction between the people of color, even within the city of Coatesville. So I'll leave it at that for now, but that then leads to safety issues, which I know is another whole thing, but that's what I see as one of the issues with diversity in the community, as well as the whole, and I won't get into it because Graves talked about it, but the whole access is huge too.
Outstanding. I'm going to go to Mr. Wilburn. Same question, but I want to add a piece to it. Before you give your response, could you define diversity for me? Because I think diversity can be one of those terms that can be ambiguous, subjective, and we have some students who are going to be watching this later. So we want to kind of lay a smooth foundation for them to give them some accuracy as they're developing their own politics. So what is diversity for you? And what are the main issues regarding diversity within the Coatesville community, Mr. Wilburn?
Sure, thank you. I mean, for me, diversity, and I think, Ms. Graves did a good job just broadening it beyond simply race and culture, but to goes to economics, go to human sexuality, go to gender. But it is, for me, diversity is having, a variety of different cultures, genders, experience at the table. And for me, it's important that it's in positions of power and decision-making positions to have a diverse community where you have, equal representation in the population of Black, white, Latino, male, female, diverse economics, but only people in all the people in decision-making positions, whether it's the school board or the city council or economically, are predominantly one race, one gender. Ms. Graves said this well, you have a appearance of diversity, but the culture that's being created, decisions. So for me, it's important that there's a variety of voices and experiences reflected, not just in the community, but specifically in those positions of power and leadership.
Outstanding, outstanding. Josh, I'm going to ask you the same question. With you and your family's long history of doing amazing work in the Coatesville community in a variety of ways, you have an interesting perspective on this particular topic. So share, what do you think are the main issues surrounding diversity within the Coatesville community?
I think the rich diversity that this community has is in some ways a blessing and a curse, because we can brag and proclaim to everybody around us that this is a diverse community with a rich history and diversity. And if you go into the schools, you're going to see, different people from different walks of life and experience and culture. And so that's the blessing of the community. Like, my kids can grow up in a classroom with, 3 or 4 different types of kids coming from different types of backgrounds and cultures and ethnicities and experiences. And yet it's a curse in a sense that it almost has given us the ability to be just okay with saying that we're a community that's rich in history of diversity. And it just, the buck kind of stops there. And so I think the biggest challenge that we have now is, diversity isn't virtuous in and of itself. Like, we can't brag that we have diversity. As a pastor, I could say hell has diversity. Don't mean hell is great, but it has to extend beyond that. And I think the biggest challenge or problem with that is we haven't had the ability to take it beyond just saying we're rich in diversity. It hasn't gone to the next level of inclusion. It hasn't gone from inclusion to equity. And so I think the biggest challenge now is, how do we take this strength that we have and not allow it to be a hindrance and just say we're okay with diversity without inclusion and equity.
Yeah. And I love the component that Mr. Wilburn addressed, because oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we forget to talk about power, the sharing of power, the disseminating of power, the acknowledgement that simply a place at the table doesn't equate the ability to make decisions. So just add that component to the diversity, but I appreciate all of your responses. And I'm going to go to question 2, and this time I'm actually going to start with you, Josh, and come back around. We know that there's been a tremendous amount of tragedy and trauma within the Coatesville community here recently. With those issues in mind, along with the diversity, how does that affect the safety of the city of Coatesville? What can we do? And we're thinking solution, but we also want to talk about the dangers that we also see within the community, not only the stereotype of Coatesville, because when we talk about Coatesville, oftentimes we all know the stereotype, but also the actual reality of people dealing with things in Coatesville. So my question, sum it up, with those issues and concerns in mind, how does that affect the safety in the city of Coatesville, Josh?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said stereotypes, because I think that one of the biggest hindrances is stereotypes and biases when it comes to people's opinions, people's resistance to change, and I think a lot of it just comes out of people's unwillingness to address the real needs. And we're okay with just saying, well, that's a stereotype or that's a personal bias that you have, and it never gets down to the nitty gritty. One of my favorite sayings is we need to have a willingness to embrace the pain for something greater than the pain. And so I've chosen to, not just say, oh man, Coatesville, has all these problems and need all this help. I want my family and my kids to grow up in the same neighborhood and the same schools that every other kid is growing up in. Because I think the reality is problems really don't become our problems until they're our problems, right? So we're not going to fight for our schools if we're sending our kids out to a private school somewhere else. We're not going to fight for the justice system unless we're seeing the injustices done by, those people in power on our street corners and in our neighborhoods. And so, I think, to answer your question, I think that would be that's the problem that we face, the challenge that we face, and getting people to move beyond acknowledging the problem, but saying, no, like, how do I become an agent of change? How do these problems become so real to me that they affect my life? I can't go around it. I can't avoid it. I can't just write an article about it. I can't just grieve when it happens and then a couple months later forget about it or read a book. I think that's been the easiest thing for many of us the past several years is the amount of resources that we have to read about. I'm grateful for, but oftentimes, it stops at our reading list. And I think we need to go beyond that to really organize as a community and to really hear from the people that are the most marginalized. So I stepped on the school board because I felt like there was a large population of students in our school district that are marginalized whose voices weren't being heard. And so I have no other agenda than to at least raise awareness and be the voice of those people, those folks that don't have a voice, that aren't in positions where they can be heard. And oftentimes because of stereotypes and biases and resistance to change of placing those people in positions where they do have a voice, they need advocates to stand in the gap for them so that they can be heard and be placed into a position where they can be heard.
Outstanding. Councilperson Graves, whose pronouns for everyone who's listening and viewing it are they, them. So when we're addressing, we want to make sure that we're using the proper pronouns for everyone. That's very important. Councilperson Graves, you are a community activist. You are a part of the city government. Your family has a long history of good work within the Coatesville community. You're deeply aware of the concerns and issues. I guess the question is, for you specifically, how do those concerns affect the safety of the Coatesville community? How do they tie in? How do they build together? And what are some of your thoughts surrounding the safety and community?
Thanks, Elgin. Community safety is like literally my number one issue. If anyone ever asks me about safety, that is like where I'm the most astute and like I've read the most and done the most work around. So like the first part of the question I would say is safety for who? Because we deserve a community that is safe for every single community member. And the safety of part of our community cannot come at the expense of the safety for others. We know that the current systems of safety that we have in place can become extremely dangerous for people who this system is not prepared to contend with. And that's also like a hard fact to know and to understand and to process. That there are things that make people feel safe that are dangerous to other folks. Like both those things exist at the same time. But the reality of the fact is, and especially in this moment, and especially in this time, everything in our lives is calling us to be responsible for safety. We cannot sit back and think that someone else is going to keep our communities free of harm. We have to be responsible because that's the only way that public safety is going to work. The public has to be deeply involved. Number one, as a legislature, we have to think about what even causes people to be unsafe. And I mean, there's a very tiny percent of the population that is like, it is just time to wreak havoc. And that's honestly untreated mental illness. But for a larger part of the harm that happens within communities, it's things like unmet needs and unhealed trauma. People are dealing with deep trauma, poverty, mental illness, drug abuse. And in order to make people safer, we have to get at the root of those issues. We cannot keep putting people away, taking them out of a community and putting them into an harmful and violent environment, bringing them back into the community and think that's going to make the community safer, because it has not yet. That's the other thing too, is it has not made us safer yet. We have to, as a community, invest money and time and willingness into healing issues that cause crime, cause harm, cause people to be unsafe. And the other thing is take responsibility for healing. The streets, like, we're all from this place. Stuff to happen when it's on the brink. Why can't we, what's going on here? Can we solve this? How can we intervene before the system of incarceration, the system of injustice even gets involved? But we don't want to be involved. We don't want to be abused. And at some point, we do have to take responsibility to resolve conflict, to invest in our community, because we cannot take away one without doing the work. And that's the thing too, is like, this is work, and keeping a community safe is work.
Sure. Mr. Berry, same question, along with your thoughts on safety, ideas, concerns, desires surrounding safety. Mr. Berry.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm gonna answer it simply from following up on my diversity question or diversity statement. So if you recall, I said with diversity, for me, one of the things I have seen is, within the school, it's very diverse. But once we hit the community, that diversity kind of segregates itself. But it's the segregation to me that is the safety issue, or one of the safety issues. So when we start going off into our own systems and own thoughts, basically we become me focused, and that me focus takes things away from, I'm not going to snitch, I'm not going to get involved unless it involves me. I see something going on down there, I'm going to turn my head because it doesn't concern me. And I think that's where some of the safety, especially when it comes to diversity, comes into play. So I offer simple solutions, and that's go back to, what I saw when I first came to Coatesville 15 years ago. And that was, bring back more of the block parties, bring back more of the community neighborhood watch programs, bring back those things that bring people out together to get to know each other, and then to get people feel like I am my brother's keeper. You know, we constantly say things like it takes a community, but we need to make sure we're investing and putting those things in place that will allow us to actually be a community.
And Mr. Berry, I want to offer another question to you too, just to give not necessarily some pushback, but to bring that thought a little bit further. Because you mentioned the block parties, you mentioned the community activities, you also mentioned the segregation. But in your solution, where does the systemic issues come into play? What are some of the solutions for the poverty we see in the community, the crime that we see in the community, the disconnect between local politicians, police, and the community? What are some of your solutions and thoughts around those things?
I think honestly, it's similar to what others have said, and we can't just look at diversity from what does someone look like, or just because hey, we need more Asian people on this committee, and you stick an Asian person on there. You have to make sure whoever and whatever we have access to, people have power to speak and to act. So that's where my solution is if we first of all look at what are these avenues that we need to have people in to make these decisions, to make change, but then also how do we ensure that just because they're at this table and at the seat, they actually have a voice and able to speak. I've talked with, in the past, I remember Harry Lewis had become a senator, and I asked him what was one of the greatest challenges, and he said it was, going there and being very active in Coatesville, and I really wanted to go there and speak up and make a change for Coatesville. He said, but one of the toughest things was, as a newbie, I really didn't have a lot of power to speak, and it made it difficult. And he said, I wish someone would have told me how to navigate that from the door. I would have been able to come in and made a difference, hopefully right away, versus I had to learn and learn and learn. So it's back to just making sure when we do put people into situations of power or authority, we're also making sure that they have the ability to have a voice and to really make a change.
Outstanding. Mr. Wilburn, same question, sir, surrounding safety within the Coatesville community. What are your thoughts, sir?
Sure. And I appreciate Nydea's comment about safe for who, because a lot of times there's a perception from outsiders of Coatesville that Coatesville is unsafe, and that there needs to be maybe a more security mindset to make it safer for people coming in. And as someone who raised my family on South 6th Avenue right in the city, I didn't feel unsafe. I didn't feel that my kids were unsafe. I think when we talk about safety, and Elgin, you mentioned this, I think the people who are most vulnerable are those, just in my opinion, who are living in poverty, right? And access to resources for that community. That's kind of the target that my organization works with. And so, I think people are most at risk when they don't have access to resources, whether it be employment, and certainly there's been a lot of conversation about transportation in the city. But I think that, but there's not a good public transportation for people in the city to access jobs and good paying jobs. There's a bus that runs, every hour through the center of town. There's no SEPTA. So access to, good paying jobs. I think when we look at, and Josh mentioned, and several people mentioned education, but we do have a school district that is very diverse, but our Hispanic and Black students are significantly behind, white students in reading and math. Almost double are falling, the percentage is falling behind. And so we need to look at, if education is important to economic power and to, healthy lifestyle, then we need to look at why is this system not serving one part of our population better than the other parts of our population. And I think, and so if you have children who are not getting adequately educated, I think that makes it unsafe for them. Their options are reduced, choices that they make in life are reduced. And so, systemically, I think those are, we need to look at that 30% that's at or below the federal poverty level and say, what do they need in order to, to thrive, to overcome, to break that cycle of poverty and to move out, because I think, that is the most vulnerable population. I do just want to mention this conversation too, just that we do have a growing Spanish-speaking population in the community. And so, and there's vulnerability there too, because if they're illegal, then, if a crime happens, there's fear of going to the police because there's fear that if they report and so that they'll be, arrested for being illegal and sent away. And then there's also the language barrier. And so, inability to communicate needs. So I think that's a piece of our city too, that, it's almost 25-30% now. And so we need to make sure that in every aspect of our community that there are, Spanish speaking people who can communicate and resources for that population as well.
Outstanding. This particular question is going to be geared towards your individual organizations, your individual desires, things that you're working towards as to create solutions within the community. So as we ask this question, one of the things I want to be able you to think of is what you and your organization are doing in light of this particular question. What changes, supports need to be put in place in order for the Coatesville community to grow in a more positive and healthy direction? And actually, Mr. Wilburn, I'm going to let you go first with this one. I'll repeat the question for you. What changes, supports need to be put in place in order for the Coatesville community to grow in a more positive, healthy direction?
Yeah, so that's a big question. The area that our organization focuses on is education. And so, I mentioned things like transportation. I've mentioned that we need, people in power for that to reflect the community and be more diverse. I think as I think about our children, youth in the school system, I would love to see, as we talk about power, I would love to see a more diverse teaching staff in our school district that reflects the diversity of the students. I think, we have a school district that, actually white students are less than 50% in the district, but our teaching staff, our administrative staff doesn't reflect that level of diversity. And so, I think it's important for students growing up to see adults who can not just teach them the academics, but relate to their experience, relate to their culture, to speak into that in meaningful ways that might relate. I think alongside of that, and Nydea mentioned, poverty, but also trauma, that, mental health resources are extremely important too. I think we've seen, even coming through for our low-income families who are already in crisis, and then you add this pandemic on top of it, it's crisis on crisis, it's trauma on trauma. And so, looking for ways to continue to provide emotional and, and spiritual support for our young people so that they can, if they're struggling with basic needs, it's gonna be hard for them to think about algebra or biology, or so we really need to around education create more diversity in the school system, and I think more supports for all of our students.
Outstanding. Councilperson Graves, same question. What changes, supports need to be put in place in order for the Coatesville community to grow in a more positive and healthy direction?
Yes, thanks, Elgin. I think the thing that I would offer is that the community needs mechanisms of dual and concurring power for community members. So the things that would help us grow in a healthier direction is, number one, we need to have our immediate needs met, because it's hard for us to become stabilized without our immediate needs met. So organizations I'm a part of, like Chester County Stands Up, runs a mutual aid program where people can come to have direct needs, or Friends Association, where people can call 211 and be directed to like an ERAC program to have their rent paid immediately. But people also need advocacy too, because we are going and thinking like, okay, a program like Friends Association can have your rent paid, or somebody from Chester County Stands Up can give you a ride to give you a vaccine. But also there needs to be people in office and advocates in the streets to make sure that we change policies. Like, why are people spending 2/3 of their paychecks on housing? How can we make housing more equal and equitable as far as policy, as far as legislation? While there's programs like Friends Association paying rent, we need to make sure that people have their rent paid systemically, or not struggling systemically. And so we need dual power. We need people who are advocating and people who are serving, because the people who are serving shouldn't have to continue serving forever, because things shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't have spaces in the system where nonprofits need to step in and do work for folks who are, I mean, humankind is advanced to the point where we really shouldn't have people struggling to survive. We're beyond hunting and gathering. And so I think that the most important thing for all of us is advocating on two fronts: getting needs met and advocating for change.
Outstanding. And Councilperson, I want to follow up real quickly, and Mr. Berry, I'm going to pass it to you right afterwards. Councilperson Graves, touch a little bit more, because at the end of the month, we know that the CDC eviction moratorium is going to be more than likely lifted. So we're going to see mass evictions taking place across the county. You mentioned the ERAP program of Friends Association. Can you briefly give a little bit more information about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the ERAP program is Emergency Rental Assistance Program, where anyone who is affected by COVID, which we were all affected by COVID because COVID was a global crisis, can call 211 and receive help from the county. If you have an eviction, Friends Association has an eviction prevention court, and you'll likely come to Friends Association to have the ERAP, be able to pay a portion of your rent. If you aren't able to pay your rent, you're likely within the qualifying income, because I believe it's 80% of the median income of Chester County. But because Chester County is such a rich county, the median income is like $92,000. So, if you're in Coatesville, where the median income is $30,000, you're likely below the county median. So please call 211 and get help. And while you're doing that, I am a person who will be in the streets advocating for a homes guarantee, which says that everybody deserves safe, sustainable, accessible, and permanently affordable housing. So that's how dual power works. So if you're struggling with rent and you've been affected by COVID, which you have, please call 211.
Outstanding. Mr. Berry, sir, what changes, supports need to be put in place in order for the Coatesville community to grow in a more positive and healthy direction?
So obviously representing our organization, Coatesville Youth Initiative, I'm obviously going to come this from a youth perspective. So from a youth angle, what we advocate are two things. And one is direct services for youth, particularly around offering life after and opportunities after the bell rings with school. So we push things like life skills for youth, teaching them decision making, all the things. We can go on and on and on, but that's a big piece of what I believe the solution is really dealing with youth one-on-one, after school, outside of school, providing them positive opportunities, but also providing them things to help them develop into positive community members. The other thing that we really advocate for and that we facilitate is what's called a coalition. So from the coalition end, it's all around the theory of you can't, or you're going to make more progress in a community or really in anything if you bring people together and you bring resources together. So with our coalition, we bring agencies, residents, who's ever interested in youth development together, looking at how do we align our resources to further the efforts and make a greater impact. So for example, our last piece of research we did pre-pandemic showed that there's approximately more than 70 social service agencies serving Coatesville, providing about 170 services. But most of those are fragmented and don't connect with one another. So what happens is they actually don't end up reaching the population that they need to reach. So with the coalition, the concept is let's come together, look at our resources, look at how we're handling things, and kind of try to streamline things that we are reaching more people and more people efficiently.
Two questions for you, Mr. Berry. One in regards to the youth with the program there. What say or autonomy that the youth have in developing the programs there? Because one of the things that we see is everybody wants to come up with programs for the youth to do and say the youth don't have anything to do, but I don't see a whole lot of people asking the youth exactly what they want to be involved in. What type of input do the youth have at your organization?
Yeah, first of all, a great point. That is the foundation of what we're built on, is youth have to have the voice. So on the one hand, we have a youth council, and our youth council, they provide feedback for us, but they also, part of their role is to go out to other youth and get that feedback. We rely heavily on data. There's a lot of data out there, specifically through the school district, where youth tell you what they need. All of Coatesville Youth Initiative is built on what youth have said, is specifically around some of that data. So we do a lot of surveying. We do a lot of youth groups, talks. We have a youth conference, and that youth conference in November is built around getting youth feedback. So 100% of what we do is based on what youth tell us they want to do. So some of those things are more intense, like we're going to teach you life skills, but we'll ask them what kind of life skills do they find interesting, do they want to know about? But some of those things are things that people don't equate necessarily to, positive youth development. It's just things like we sponsor kickball games, we sponsor movie nights, because that's what they say they want to do to have fun and have a positive experience. So bottom line is, yes, you're absolutely right. That's essential. And that's how we handle it through our youth council, but also through a lot of surveying and a lot of feedback that we get, and reaching out to other agencies like the Bridge Academy, Coatesville Kids to College, and finding out what's going on at you guys' agencies. What have you heard, et cetera.
Cool. Josh, before I come to you, Mr. Berry, one last thing. You mentioned the coalition. I agree with you 100% that Coatesville is over-organized, over-agencyed. There's agencies everywhere doing 101 things. So the idea of a collaboration and working together is brilliant. It's much needed. But what I also realize is that many organizations are power hoarding from the standpoint of not necessarily to be the top organization or the top dog, but just having an inability to work with other organizations. And I'm sure you've encountered that. What are some of the strategies and ways that your organization is able to navigate that power hoarding component?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest obstacle to running a coalition is a lot of organizations don't actually understand the concept that if you work together, and I'll talk specifically around something like funding, because that's where a lot of the power hungry comes. But people don't realize, especially in this day and age of funding funders and donors want to see collaboration. It's not these individual applications that get the money, it's working together. So the answer to your question for us is education. We're struggling and trying to get out there and educate agencies on why you need to collaborate and why we need to come together. And we try to demonstrate of how you can affect more people, how you can actually get more money, all these different things by coming together and joining with other partners.
Outstanding. Pastor Cran, sir, this is something I know that you're incredibly passionate about. Your family is incredibly passionate about. Your work in the community demonstrates your passion and desire. What changes and supports need to be put in place to change the current view or feel even within Coatesville to move towards a more healthy, positive direction?
Here's the thing, there's a lot of things we can do. I think we need to ask the question, what are those things that we must do? And I think a lot of these organizations, including ourselves, so I'm not, our organization isn't better than the next guy because we all make the same mistakes, but I think we get busy in the things that we can do and programs and less focus on what does this community need right now? And so we need to have a long-term vision and a short-term vision. So, what does it look like for the next 100 days for our organization? All right. This community is a food desert. So, plenty of organizations, distributing food, distributing meals. And every single one of these organizations has long lines of people. So you see the great need. That's an immediate need that can be met. Just like you said, the rental assistance, the help paying we just got I forget, $3,800 water bill from a family. My family couldn't pay a $3,800 water bill, and I don't know many families that could. And so how do you provide the resources to meet those immediate needs? I know we talked a lot about education, and I think that's most important. So even for the kids, it's an easy thing. There isn't much for kids to do in Coatesville, but it's got to be more than just rolling the ball out on a basketball court. There needs to be programs that are helping our kids learn how to read. They're not reading by third grade. The chances of them, the school to prison pipeline is astronomical when it comes to reading. And so, our organization has made a big shift in getting like professional reading specialists in this year. And it costs a lot of money. A lot of money goes into that, but it's going to make a long-term impact. I have a friend that's a superintendent in Philadelphia schools. And, there's a statistic that goes around that there's only 2% of African-American men in education. He told me the most recent statistic, and it currently is around 1.28%. And so if our school district is, 48% African-American students, and we can only provide for them, and I don't even know if we meet the quota of a 1.2% in our school district. And so it's getting our young people to even think, like, speaking life into them and saying, you would make an incredible teacher someday. You would make an incredible engineer someday. And I'm all for sports. I'm a sports guy, but sometimes we settle with saying, man, you'll make a great point guard someday.
Yeah.
And so it's speaking life. It's giving them what they need. Education is what they need. Nydea, your incredible resources that you've even posted on social media the last few weeks on, the housing and inadequate housing. Coatesville has 75% rental in the city of Coatesville. And so we need to figure out some way to collaborate together and provide not just adequate housing, but home ownership. Allow people not to get into a hole of just renting for years and never have anything that they can leave their children. The disparities are significant. And so I think education, the immediate resources of food and housing but I think when we think long-term, I'm a firm believer in reparations, especially in our community. And I think a great way to begin that is in education and housing. And that's something that we can tangibly do to provide adequate housing that people can own, not rent, and provide an education that's free for our students to be and to be taught by people that look like them and have the same experiences that they do. And I think Jarvis and Keith on here, and there's probably some others, the collaboration is huge. And that stems from, we need to take responsibility of that as organizations. And the CYI has done a great job. We collaborate every year with Keith and several other organizations to provide 1,800 book bags for the community. And that's an all year long process. Those kind of things. And churches, churches have the same problem. No church wants to work together. But you know what? There's some light happening right now. There's 4 churches right now that took an offering this past week for a church that hasn't been able to open in our community, that has way less resources than any other church. They haven't been able to open since the pandemic happened. And I think they raised, I don't know, several $1,000s, maybe $10,000 for this church to be able to open. And that's what it takes. It takes people that have the resources to distribute those resources to the people that actually need it. And so, that if you want to see long-term significant change, those things, reallocation of resources, education, food, and housing need to happen in this city. And it has to happen with the people that are here. There's a lot of good going on right now. But unfortunately, the people that we work with on a daily basis on this phone call are not in the conversation. They're not at the table. And so that's where diversity, inclusion, and equity come. Coatesville is okay with diversity, right? They're okay with this, this plan of redevelopment and, for the city. They might be okay with inclusion. Let's have a couple people, they can sit at the table and eat a little bit. Well, equity is, we're going to give these people their own table, right? And their own, they have their own table. They have their own, they have the resource to do and to be what everybody else is. And so that's where we need to get to. I could go on and on and on. So I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time.
No, not at all. I want to thank all of the panelists for showing up. And we just have a few minutes. So in 30 seconds and less, panelists, share any final thoughts. I'll start with Councilperson Graves. 30 seconds or less, final thoughts.
Yes, well, 30 seconds or less. Okay. So I just want to, number one, thank everyone for being here. I'm so honored to share this space with you all. I do believe that we will be the people who take on our community, make it work for the adults and children that live here, and reflect the beauty of what this community is. I just want to remind everyone that this all takes work, and the time calls for us to rise to the occasion. There's a lot going on. Our community is quickly changing, and we really need to do the work to make sure we stay in our community and all of our community is cared for, harm is healed, and we are safe. And that's real work. But I'm honored to do the work with and on behalf of all of you.
Councilperson Graves, thank you. Mr. Berry, 30 seconds or less, sir. Any final thoughts?
I'll add, so wrapping everything up for me, 3 points: education, empowerment, and collaboration. And simply what that means for me is, we obviously need to do the intervention. We need to provide meals, emergency meals, emergency rental assistance, et cetera. But we also need to make sure we're focusing and providing education for that empowerment step, so that, like Josh said, we're teaching people how to own homes and how to get into situations where they can get out of that cycle. And then a lot of that for me is done through collaboration. We need to come together as organizations, as a community, and really work together to make some of these things happen.
Again, Mr. Berry, thank you for joining the panel. Mr. Wilburn, sir, 30 seconds or less, any final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, thank you all. And I would just offer this, that as the Spanish-speaking population is growing, that in these dialogues, I think in the future, it's important to have those voices at the table too. They do make up about 30% of the Coatesville community now. So I would just, ask for that. I think, we talked a little bit, Josh was just talking about the future development. There is fear of gentrification. And I would just say, Coatesville is a uniquely beautiful place. And so I would just caution against, people who have visions for Coatesville of not trying to fix it or make it look like some other community, but really investing in the people who are here, and to see transformation being about empowering, the current residents to make Coatesville uniquely beautiful and uniquely strong. So I just, the empowerment and Coatesville, its people, to me, is its greatest resource. Just so many amazing people. And so what can we do to create a community for the people who are here that's healthier and safer and more life-giving? So.
Thank you again, Mr. Wilburn, for joining us today. Pastor Krantz, last but not least, final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I would just say, keep our community in your thoughts and prayers. We've had some great tragedies the past couple of weeks, and I did a funeral of an 8-year-old little girl from our community that passed away in a car accident last week. And I'm sure you've read the papers of the tragedy that happened this past weekend. And, for the people on this call, these are kids and families that we rub shoulders with every single day. And it has a profound impact on, people's hearts and minds and just how they cope. And so just keep us in your thoughts. And I would invite you to visit any one of these organizations and come and see the work that's being done. Interact with the kids that come through our doors each and every day. And one of my biggest themes so far this year for this city has been, we want to see community transformation without gentrification. And I think, some of these organizations are passionate about that. We want to see our community transformed. And so I invite you guys to visit and to see the incredible work that's being done and meet the incredible families that are here. It is a special place, but we need a lot of resources, and we need the right people and places of power to advocate on our people's behalf. So I just thank you for your time.
And again, I want to thank the whole panel for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it to Leah. Thank you.
Yes, so I know we had a hard hour, but we had 2 people who wanted to ask a question. Panelists, are you okay to stay on a couple minutes? Okay, so I want to ask Lori Shannon Bailey to unmute because she shared, I'm assuming she, maybe not, you would like to ask a question verbally.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful conversation. My question is about mental health, and my question is directly to child guidance staff. I'm working with a family whose mother is currently incarcerated. The 10th grader and the 6th grader is truant. They have missed well over 100 days. They are in need, the children are in need of emergency mental health assistance. Can you help? If so, what guidance can I give dad who is struggling raising 5 children? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And we see families in crisis and struggle all the time. Definitely reach out to me. I'm going to put my information in the chat. There are definitely resources that we can provide. Right now, there is a wait list for our provider and all community providers. The pandemic has really hit people really, really hard. But that said, there's always some creative support that we can provide or find an organization who is able to serve this family immediately. So Lori, I'm going to put my information in the chat and you can call or email me today. And we will work with our Coatesville team to see what we can do for this family in need. There's definitely a mental health crisis, both with what people are experiencing, but also with the underfunded, under-resourced system. So just calling that out for everybody on the call. The more that we advocate up to legislature that we need better support and funding, the more we can serve these families. Because while we serve 10,000 kids and families every year, we could triple that. So that was more my call for action for everybody else. But Lori, great question. I'm going to direct message you and let's talk right after this so we can figure out what we can do for that family.
Thank you.
Leah, thanks, Ms. Lori, Shannon Bailey, for asking that question. Can I just add one more thing to that question, Leah?
Yeah.
What does it look like for children who have a similar experience to the one Ms. Lori just described, but the children are not ready to enter mental health resources or therapy yet? They are, not ready yet.
By not ready, do you mean not willing, or do you mean? Okay. I actually, Andy, Dr. Kind-Rubin, can I spotlight you and have you answer this one as our chief clinical officer? I'm assuming you're going to say yes, so I'm going to add you as a spotlight. All right, go ahead, Andy.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
So I'm just going to personalize it. My brother and myself are in a similar situation. We've been, struggling with addiction of our caretakers. And of course, I'm an adult, I'm a caretaker. But however, my brother is not ready or willing to talk to a mental health specialist about it yet. And what would you say to people who do have children who need access to mental health care, but are not willing to do so?
Well, so there are a whole variety. So hopefully, it's a process, and ultimately they will be willing to if they, over time, as it's introduced and spoken about. But there are also sort of, natural supports that people can turn to, whether it be, faith-based communities or school or youth groups, youth initiatives, where there are just, mentors and others within the community with whom they can talk. So it doesn't have to be, a professional necessarily.
I would also add on, it sounds like these are younger kids, but if the children are 14 or older in Pennsylvania, they have the right to determine if they want care regardless of your caregiver. So that's something you can do. We definitely have had children who have, teens who have reached out at that 14 years. It's younger than most states, so that's helpful. Another thing that we can do, Child Guidance offers a weekly free support group. It's at 2 p.m., so it's a little difficult, but we're happy to do evenings if that's a need with a therapist. So that's available. It is free for people who are like, how do I strategically help these kids get support? How can I work to get our needs met? So if you want to talk to someone, but it is such a tricky situation. And I know we see caregivers and families all the time who have struggles with parents not feeling, ready or able to reach out for help. There is still so much stigma. So there's not really a cut and dry answer, but hopefully that helped. And the meetup is, we posted on our social media. And if you are interested in doing an evening one, happy to set that up as well. All right. Natalie, thank you for your question. I'm going to reach out to you directly so we can talk about getting access to services at Child Guidance or somewhere else. I'm going to give you my information in our chat. Thank you for asking that question.
Can I just add to, it just takes me to, I'll be quick, but just a broader, there is a stigmatization still around mental health services. And so I do think that there's just ongoing work for all of us who run organizations, all community leaders to continue, church leaders to continue to just do the work of normalizing reaching out for mental health services and help. So just a call for that work, I think, from all of us. And I know many of us are doing it, but we need to really work against the stigma still that's on.
Yeah, it's really everywhere. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can make it accessible in all communities, the better. And I know from our end, the struggle against funding is so tough. So the more we do, the better. Also, great point. Romani George also shared that youth peer services are another suggestion for children and families.
Leah, could I just add one thing?
Of
And
course.
this relates to what Keith said is, so, at this point in particular, the mental health system is under, incredible stress. And just to be transparent, it does not appear to me that we are able to meet the need the way that we want to. So as we are advocating for all these different services with our local governments and county, state, we're advocating for a variety of services. I encourage everyone to advocate for increased funding for mental health services, because it's a tremendous need.
Yes. All right. Well, I know we could talk all day. I'm going to just share my information in the chat if anybody else is having some issues with mental health stuff. I'm going to put that right now. And I'm also going to put my cell. You can text me anytime. You can call me. It's my personal cell phone number. But happy to do that because I'm always out on the road. But thank you all so much. This conversation has been so powerful. I really want to thank our panelists for joining us, for sharing your insights, and for all the work you're doing in our communities. We want this to be an ongoing conversation, and we want to support as an agency and also one another to really continue to build the Coatesville that we know is possible. So yes, I think that's everything. As always, if you have any questions, you can contact us. Our website is cgrc.org. You can find information for all of our panelists and their amazing organizations on our website and social media as well. So thank you all. I appreciate your questions, and we will talk to you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you, Elgin, for moderating. You were wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Elgin.
All right, bye all.